The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m., but Jake was already awake. He had been staring at the ceiling for the past hour, his mind racing with worries that seemed to multiply in the darkness. The small apartment felt cramped and cold, even though summer was just around the corner. He rolled out of bed and walked to the kitchen where bills were scattered across the small table like fallen leaves. Jake picked up the envelope marked Final Notice and shook his head. 2 months behind on rent, and his landlord had already been more patient than most. He opened his wallet and counted the crumpled 20s and 5s inside. $43. That was all he had until his next paycheck, which wouldn't come for another 5 days. At 28 years old, Jake never imagined his life would look like this. 6 years ago, he was full of hope and ambition, fresh out of technical school with dreams of building a successful career as an aircraft mechanic. He loved working with his hands, solving complex problems, and the satisfaction that came with fixing something that seemed impossible to repair. But the aviation industry had been rough lately, and steady jobs were harder to find than he ever expected. The layoffs started 6 months ago. The maintenance company he worked for lost several major contracts, and they had to let go of half their staff. Jake was one of the newer employees, so he was among the first to go. Since then, he had been picking up whatever contract work he could find. 1 day here, 2 days there, never knowing when the next job would come or how long it would last. His sister Mia's medical bills made everything worse. She had been diagnosed with a rare condition that required expensive treatments not fully covered by insurance. Jake had already sold his motorcycle, his guitar, and half of his professional tools just to help pay for her medications. Every time he looked at his nearly empty toolbox, he felt a piece of his identity slipping away. The morning routine was always the same. Jake would make instant coffee, check his phone for any messages about work, and then drive his old pickup truck to whatever job site needed him that day. The truck was 15 years old and made concerning noises, but it was paid off and still ran, which was more than he could say for most things in his life. Today he was headed to Metropolitan Airport for what his supervisor called routine maintenance work. Jake knew this was code for the boring, simple jobs that nobody else wanted to do. While other mechanics got to work on the fancy private jets and complex aircraft systems, he was usually assigned to change oil, replace basic parts, and clean equipment. It wasn't challenging work, but it paid the bills, or at least some of them. The drive to the airport took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Jake used this time to think, which wasn't always a good thing. His thoughts often drifted to his father, who had worked as a mechanic for 30 years before retiring. His dad always said that hard work and honesty would be rewarded eventually, but Jake was starting to wonder if that was really true. He had been working hard for years, but the rewards seemed to go to other people. At the airport, Jake parked in the employee lot and walked toward the maintenance hangar. The early morning air was crisp, and he could hear the distant sound of jets taking off and landing. There was something about airports that still excited him, even after all these years. The precision, the technology, the way everything had to work perfectly for people to safely travel thousands of miles through the sky. His supervisor, Tony, barely looked up when Jake checked in. Tony was the kind of guy who had given up on caring about much of anything years ago. He handed Jake a clipboard with the day's assignments without making eye contact. Basic maintenance on the smaller aircraft in Hangar 3, Tony said in his usual monotone voice. Nothing fancy. Just follow the checklist. Jake nodded and took the clipboard. He had hoped for something more interesting, maybe a chance to work on one of the larger aircraft or tackle a more complex problem. But he knew better than to complain. Work was work, and he needed every dollar he could earn. He grabbed his toolbox and headed toward Hangar 3, trying to stay positive despite the disappointment. The walk across the tarmac always reminded Jake why he loved aviation. Massive jets sat like sleeping giants, their polished surfaces reflecting the morning sun. Ground crews moved with practiced efficiency, preparing aircraft for departure. Pilots walked by in their crisp uniforms, carrying flight bags and looking confident and professional. Jake sometimes wondered what it would be like to have that kind of job security and respect. As he reached Hangar 3, Jake noticed something unusual happening near the private jet terminal. There was more activity than normal, with people moving around frantically and gesturing toward one of the aircraft. Ground crew members were talking on radios, and even from a distance, Jake could see the tension in their body language. His professional curiosity kicked in. After 6 years of working on aircraft, Jake had developed an instinct for recognizing when something was wrong. The way people were positioned around the jet, the urgency in their movements, the fact that an expensive-looking aircraft was sitting, motionless on the runway when it should probably be in the air. All of these details told him there was a serious problem. Jake tried to focus on his assigned work, but he kept glancing toward the commotion. He could see more people gathering around the troubled aircraft, including what looked like executives in business suits. Whatever was happening, it was clearly important and probably expensive to fix. Part of Jake wanted to walk over and see if he could help, but another part of him knew better. He was just a contract mechanic working on routine maintenance. Nobody would want his input on whatever high-level problem was happening with that fancy jet. He had learned over the years that staying in his lane was usually the safest approach. But as he worked on his assigned tasks, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was one of those moments that could change everything. He had always believed that opportunities came disguised as problems, and the scene unfolding near the private terminal looked like a very big problem indeed. The question was whether he had the courage to step outside his comfort zone and see if he could make a difference. The morning sun was getting higher, and Jake could feel sweat starting to form on his forehead as he worked. But his mind wasn't entirely focused on the task at hand. Something was telling him to pay attention to what was happening across the tarmac, even though logic said he should just keep his head down and finish his assigned work. Little did Jake know that this ordinary Tuesday morning was about to become the most important day of his life. The struggling mechanic who had started the day counting his last few dollars was about to face a challenge that would test everything he had learned about aircraft maintenance, and more importantly, everything he believed about his own capabilities. The stage was set for an encounter that would prove that sometimes the biggest opportunities come when we least expect them, and that the skills we think aren't being noticed might be exactly what someone desperately needs. Inside the sleek Gulfstream G650, Alexandra paced back and forth like a caged tiger. Her designer heels clicked against the polished floor of the aircraft as she pressed her phone tighter against her ear. The conversation she was having could make or break her entire empire, and right now everything was falling apart. "Listen to me carefully," she said into the phone, her voice sharp with frustration. "I don't care what it costs or what strings you have to pull. I need to be in Geneva in 8 hours, not 8 days." Alexandra was not used to being told that something was impossible. As the founder and CEO of Ashford Industries, she had built a renewable energy empire worth over $3 billion by refusing to accept limitations. She had started with nothing more than a small solar panel business in her garage 15 years ago. Now her company powered entire cities with clean energy, and today's meeting in Geneva would either secure the biggest merger in her company's history or watch it crumble under the weight of aggressive competitors. The person on the other end of the phone was her assistant back at headquarters, frantically trying to arrange alternative transportation, but every private jet within 1,000 miles was either already booked, too far away, or too small to make the transatlantic journey in time. Commercial flights were out of the question. The documents Alexandra needed to review during the flight were too sensitive for public spaces, and she couldn't risk the merger details being overheard or photographed. "Ma'am, I've contacted every charter service on the East Coast," her assistant explained through the phone. "The closest available aircraft is in Miami, but it would take 4 hours just to get here, and then we'd still need to account for weather delays." Alexandra closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had been in difficult situations before, but never with so much at stake. The company she was trying to merge with had given her a hard deadline. If she wasn't at that conference table by 6 p.m. Geneva time, they would move forward with her biggest competitor instead. 20,000 jobs hung in the balance, not to mention the future of clean energy development across 3 continents. Outside the aircraft, she could see her pilot talking with several mechanics and ground crew members. Their body language told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a simple fix. The hydraulic system failure they had discovered during pre-flight checks was serious enough to ground the aircraft indefinitely. Her phone buzzed with another call. This time it was her chief financial officer calling from the company's main office. "Alexandra, the markets are already reacting to rumors about delays," he said without any greeting. "Our stock price has dropped 12% in the last hour. The board is asking questions and I'm running out of answers to give them." "Tell the board to trust me," Alexandra replied, though she wasn't sure she trusted herself at the moment. "I've never missed an important meeting in 15 years of running this company, and I'm not going to start today." But even as she said the words, Alexandra could feel doubt creeping in. She walked to the aircraft window and looked out at the busy airport. Somewhere out there was a solution to her problem, but she couldn't see it yet. The two certified mechanics, who had already examined her jet, were experienced professionals, and both had told her the same thing. The aircraft needed to be towed to a specialized maintenance facility where they could completely rebuild the hydraulic system. That process would take at least 48 hours, maybe more. The frustration was eating at her. Alexandra had always believed that every problem had a solution if you were willing to think creatively and work hard enough to find it. She had applied that philosophy to building her business, to developing new technologies, and to competing against much larger corporations. But this felt different. This was a mechanical problem that required specific expertise and equipment, neither of which seemed to be available at this airport. Her phone rang again. This time it was her counterpart from the Geneva meeting, a stern German businessman who didn't believe in small talk. "Alexandra, I'm calling to confirm your arrival time," he said in his precise English. "Our other potential partner has moved their presentation up to this evening. If you're not here to present your proposal, we'll have no choice but to move forward with them." "I'll be there," Alexandra said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "My flight has been delayed, but I'm working on solutions." "I hope so," the German replied. "This opportunity won't wait for anyone, not even someone with your reputation." After ending the call, Alexandra sat down in one of the aircraft's leather seats and tried to think. She had built her entire career on finding ways around obstacles that others considered impossible. When banks wouldn't loan money to her startup, she had found private investors. When larger companies tried to force her out of markets, she had innovated her way to better products. When government regulations threatened to shut down her operations, she had worked with legislators to create new policies that benefited everyone. But this felt different because it wasn't about business strategy or negotiation skills. This was about the physical reality of a broken aircraft that needed to be fixed by someone who understood complex mechanical systems. All the money and influence in the world couldn't change the fact that hydraulic fluid was leaking from her jet, and no amount of willpower could make the repairs happen faster. Through the aircraft window, Alexandra noticed a commotion near the main maintenance hangar. Ground crew members were pointing and gesturing, and she could see someone walking purposefully toward her aircraft. Hope flickered in her chest. Maybe one of the airport supervisors had found another mechanic who could help. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the aircraft door. Alexandra's personal security guard opened it to reveal a tired-looking airport employee. "Ma'am, there's a mechanic here who says he might be able to help with your hydraulic problem," the employee said. "He overheard some of the ground crew talking about your situation, and he asked if he could take a look at the aircraft." Alexandra felt a surge of hope mixed with skepticism. Two experienced mechanics had already declared the repair impossible under field conditions. What could one more person do that the others couldn't? But desperate times called for desperate measures, and she was definitely desperate. "Send him up," she said. "I'll talk to anyone who thinks they can get this aircraft flying again." A few minutes later, a young man in coveralls appeared at the aircraft door. His uniform was clean but clearly well worn, and he carried a toolbox that had seen better days. He didn't look like the kind of person who usually worked on $3 million aircraft, but Alexandra had learned long ago not to judge people by their appearance. "Ma'am, I'm Jake," he said simply. "I understand you're having hydraulic problems. I've worked on similar systems before, and I think I might be able to help you." Alexandra studied his face, looking for signs of overconfidence or false bravado. Instead, she saw quiet determination and genuine concern. This wasn't someone trying to impress her or make quick money. This was someone who saw a problem and wanted to help solve it. 2 other mechanics have already told me this aircraft needs to be completely rebuilt, Alexandra said. That's going to take at least 2 days. I need to be in Geneva in 8 hours. Can you really do something they couldn't? Jake nodded slowly. I can't make any promises until I see exactly what's wrong, but I've learned to be creative when standard solutions aren't available. Sometimes the best fixes come from trying approaches that others haven't considered. Something about his answer resonated with Alexandra. That philosophy of thinking differently and refusing to accept conventional limitations had driven her entire career. Maybe this ordinary-looking mechanic understood something that the others had missed. The clock was ticking, and Alexandra's empire hung in the balance. She was about to place her trust in a complete stranger whose only credentials were quiet, confidence, and a willingness to try when others had given up. The afternoon sun was merciless as Jake crawled underneath the massive aircraft. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the hot concrete below, but he barely noticed. His entire focus was on the complex maze of hydraulic lines, pumps, and seals that kept this $3 million machine in the sky. What he saw made his heart sink. This wasn't just a simple seal failure like he had hoped. The hydraulic system had multiple problems happening at the same time. Several seals had degraded simultaneously, which suggested a deeper issue with the fluid contamination. Worse yet, the backup system that should have kicked in during an emergency had also been compromised. Any other mechanic would have taken one look at this mess and immediately called for a complete system replacement. But Jake had learned long ago that sometimes the impossible just required a different approach. Above him, he could hear Alexandra pacing inside the aircraft, her high, heels clicking against the floor in a nervous rhythm. Every few minutes her phone would ring, and he could hear her voice getting more tense with each conversation. The pressure she was under was enormous, and Jake felt that weight settling on his own shoulders. This wasn't just about fixing an aircraft anymore. This was about saving someone's entire life's work. "How does it look down there?" called out Tom, one of the senior ground crew members who had been watching Jake work with growing interest. "Complicated," Jake replied, wiping hydraulic fluid from his hands. "But not impossible." The truth was, Jake had seen worse during his time in the military. Before becoming a civilian mechanic, he had spent 4 years maintaining aircraft in some of the most challenging conditions imaginable. Desert heat, limited supplies, and the constant pressure of knowing that lives depended on his work had taught him to be resourceful in ways that most mechanics never learned. He remembered one particular mission where their transport helicopter had suffered hydraulic failure in the middle of nowhere. The nearest parts depot was 3 days away, but they needed the aircraft operational within hours to evacuate wounded soldiers. Jake had spent 6 hours improvising a repair using components salvaged from damaged equipment and creative problem-solving. That would have made his instructors proud. The repair he was planning now would require that same kind of innovative thinking. Instead of replacing the entire system, Jake was going to rebuild it using a combination of new parts, salvaged components, and some techniques he had learned from an old-timer who had been fixing aircraft since before computers were invented. Word was spreading around the airport about what Jake was attempting. Other mechanics started gathering at a respectful distance, some offering help while others simply watched in fascination. It wasn't every day that someone tried to perform major hydraulic surgery on a Gulfstream jet using basic field tools. "You sure about this, kid?" asked Bobby, a veteran mechanic with 30 years of experience. "I've seen a lot of guys try to be heroes and end up making things worse." Jake paused his work and looked up at the gathered crowd. These were good people who cared about aviation safety, and their concern was genuine. But he also knew that sometimes you had to take calculated risks to achieve extraordinary results. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Jake replied. "This aircraft is going to fly today." The repair process was like performing surgery with wrenches. Every connection had to be perfect, every seal precisely aligned, every pressure reading within exact specifications. One mistake could cause catastrophic failure during flight, which was not something Jake was willing to risk. He worked methodically, checking and double-checking each step of the process. Alexandra appeared at the aircraft door every 30 minutes, clearly fighting the urge to ask about progress. Jake appreciated that she was giving him space to work, but he could feel the weight of her expectations with every turn of his wrench. Her entire empire was riding on his ability to make this repair successful. As the hours passed, more airport personnel began to take notice. Ground crews who should have been working on other aircraft found excuses to walk by and check on Jake's progress. Even some pilots stopped to observe, recognizing that they were witnessing something special. Tatiwan. Technical challenges kept mounting. The hydraulic fluid had been contaminated with metal particles, which meant Jake had to completely flush and clean the entire system before installing new seals. The backup system's failure was caused by a sensor malfunction that required him to rewire several electrical connections. Each problem he solved revealed 2 more complications that needed attention. But Jake had entered what athletes call the zone, that mental state where everything else disappears except the task at hand. His hands moved with practiced precision, and his mind processed complex mechanical relationships as naturally as breathing. This was what he had been born to do, and every difficult moment of the past 6 months had been preparing him for this single afternoon. "I've never seen anything like this," whispered Lisa, a young aircraft inspector who had been watching Jake work for the past hour. "He's basically rebuilding the entire hydraulic system from scratch." The crowd continued to grow. Word had spread through the airport's communication channels that something extraordinary was happening on Runway 3. Even some passengers from delayed flights had gathered at the terminal windows to watch the drama unfold below. Jake was completely unaware of his audience. His universe had shrunk to the space underneath this aircraft, where every bolt, seal, and connection demanded his complete attention. The repair was reaching its critical phase, where all of his improvised solutions would either work together perfectly or fail spectacularly. With 2 hours left before Alexandra's deadline, Jake began the final assembly process. This was the moment of truth, when all of his creative problem-solving would be put to the ultimate test. He had replaced damaged seals with carefully modified components from other aircraft systems. He had rewired the backup system using techniques learned from his military experience. He had flushed and refilled the hydraulic fluid using equipment borrowed from 3 different hangars. The pressure was enormous. Jake knew that hundreds of people were watching him, that Alexandra's billion-dollar empire hung in the balance, and that his own reputation as a mechanic would be defined by what happened in the next few minutes. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt strangely calm. This was his moment to prove that skill and determination could overcome any obstacle. As Jake tightened the final connections and prepared to test his repair, he thought about his sister, Mia, back home, probably sitting in another doctor's waiting room. He thought about the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen table. He thought about all the times he had been overlooked, underestimated, and passed over for opportunities that went to people with better connections or different backgrounds. None of that mattered now. What mattered was whether this aircraft would fly, whether Alexandra would make her meeting, and whether Jake's unconventional repair would hold together under the extreme pressures of flight. The moment had arrived to find out if the impossible was really just another word for improbable. Jake slid out from underneath the aircraft, hydraulic fluid staining his coveralls and sweat mixing with the grime on his face. He looked up at the gathered crowd of spectators, then at Alexandra standing in the aircraft doorway with her phone pressed to her ear, and finally at the complex machine that had consumed his entire afternoon. It was time to see if his gamble had paid off. The engines were about to start, and everyone would know within minutes whether Jake had just performed a miracle or created an expensive disaster. The engines roared to life with a sound that made everyone on the tarmac hold their breath. Jake stood beside the aircraft, his heart pounding as he watched the hydraulic pressure gauges climb steadily into the green zone. The numbers on the display were exactly what they should be. Perfect pressure, no leaks, all systems functioning normally. Against all odds, his impossible repair was working. The crowd that had gathered to watch erupted in cheers and applause. Ground crew members who had been skeptical just hours earlier were now patting Jake on the back and shaking his hand. Even, the veteran mechanics who had initially doubted his approach were nodding their approval with genuine respect in their eyes. But Jake barely heard the celebration around him. His attention was focused entirely on Alexandra, who was standing at the aircraft door with an expression he couldn't quite read. She had ended her phone call and was looking directly at him with an intensity that made him feel like she was seeing right through to his soul. "That was incredible," she said, stepping down from the aircraft to stand face to face with him on the tarmac. "I've been in business for 15 years and I've never seen anyone solve a problem like that." Up close, Jake could see that Alexandra wasn't just another wealthy businesswoman. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of his own determination, the look of someone who had fought for everything they had achieved. Her expensive suit might be perfectly tailored, but Jake could sense the same hunger for success that drove him to work 18-hour days just to pay his bills. "I just did what needed to be done," Jake replied, suddenly feeling self-conscious about his oil-stained coveralls and dirty hands. Anyone with the right training could have figured it out. Alexandra smiled for the first time since Jake had met her. "No, they couldn't have. I watched 2 other mechanics look at that same problem and walk away. You saw possibilities where they saw limitations." As her flight crew completed their final pre-departure checks, Alexandra found herself genuinely curious about the man who had just saved her company. She asked Jake about his background, his training, and how he had learned to approach problems so creatively. What she heard surprised her. Jake told her about his military service, where he had learned to fix aircraft with limited resources under extreme pressure. He explained how budget cuts in the aviation industry had made steady employment difficult, forcing him to take whatever contract work he could find. He mentioned his sister's medical condition and the financial struggles that had led him to sell most of his professional tools. "So you performed that repair with a half-empty toolbox?" Alexandra asked, genuinely impressed. "Sometimes having fewer options forces you to be more creative," Jake replied. "When you can't just replace everything, you have to really understand how things work." The conversation revealed much more than just technical competence. As Jake spoke, Alexandra recognized qualities that she had been searching for in her own organization for years. He demonstrated innovative thinking, the ability to perform under extreme pressure, and most importantly, the kind of leadership that inspired others to believe in seemingly impossible solutions. Alexandra's phone buzzed with another urgent call, but for the first time all day she ignored it. She was beginning to realize that this chance encounter might be more than just a fortunate coincidence. Her company had been struggling to find qualified personnel to manage their growing fleet of corporate aircraft. The aviation maintenance industry was full of people who could follow procedures, but finding someone who could think outside those procedures was much more difficult. "Tell me about your career goals," Alexandra said, her business instincts taking over. "What do you want to be doing 5 years from now?" Jake hesitated before answering. His dreams felt almost embarrassing to share with someone who had achieved so much success. "I've always wanted to start my own aircraft maintenance business," he said quietly, "but that requires capital, connections, and a reputation that I don't have." "What if I told you there might be another path to those goals?" Alexandra asked. Before Jake could respond, her assistant appeared with an urgent message about the Geneva meeting. Time was running short, and they needed to depart immediately if Alexandra was going to make her deadline. But instead of rushing to board the aircraft, Alexandra made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She asked her assistant to delay departure for 5 more minutes. This conversation with Jake had sparked an idea that could benefit both of them, and she wasn't willing to let the opportunity slip away just to save a few minutes of flight time. "I've built my entire career on recognizing exceptional talent wherever I find it," Alexandra told Jake. "What you just accomplished here tells me more about your capabilities than any resume ever could." Jake wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but he could sense that something important was about to happen. The billionaire businesswoman who had been a complete stranger just hours earlier was looking at him like she saw potential that he didn't even know he possessed. Alexandra's phone rang again, this time with a call from her pilot informing her that they had received clearance for immediate departure. The Geneva meeting was still within reach, but only if they left right now. She looked at Jake, then at her aircraft, then back at Jake again. "I have a proposition for you," she said, pulling out her business card. "But first let me ask you something. Are you afraid of big challenges?" "I just spent 3 hours rebuilding a hydraulic system that 2 other mechanics said was impossible to fix," Jake replied with a slight smile. "I think I can handle challenges." Alexandra laughed, a genuine surprised laugh that made her seem more human than the composed businesswoman she had appeared to be all day. "Fair point. Here's what I'm thinking. My company operates 12 aircraft across multiple locations. We need someone to oversee maintenance operations for the entire fleet. Someone who can think creatively, work under pressure, and lead teams through complex problems." Jake felt his heart racing. This was starting to sound like the kind of opportunity he had only dreamed about, but he was afraid to hope too much in case he was misunderstanding something. "The position would be based out of our headquarters with travel to facilities across the country," Alexandra continued. "You'd have a team of mechanics working under you, access to the best equipment and training programs, and the authority to implement new procedures and systems." The aircraft engines were still running, and Jake could see the pilot gesturing toward his watch. Alexandra's assistant was standing nearby with obvious anxiety, clearly worried about the tight schedule they were trying to keep. "I know this is sudden," Alexandra said, "but I've learned to trust my instincts about people. Everything I've seen today tells me that you're exactly the kind of person my company needs." Jake stood there in his stained coveralls, surrounded by the noise of jet engines and the lingering smell of hydraulic fluid, trying to process what was happening. 6 hours ago, he had been worried about paying his rent. Now, one of the most successful businesswomen in the country was offering him what sounded like the career opportunity of a lifetime. "Are you serious?" he asked, hardly believing his own ears. "I'm always serious about business decisions," Alexandra replied. "The question is, are you interested in changing your life?" The moment hung in the air between them like a challenge. Jake looked at the massive aircraft he had just repaired, at the crowd of people who had watched him accomplish the impossible, and at the woman who was offering him a chance to build the future he had always wanted. Everything he had worked for, struggled through, and dreamed about had led to this single moment of decision. The business card felt heavier than it should have in Jake's oil-stained hands. The elegant black lettering seemed to shimmer in the afternoon sunlight as he read, "Alexandra Ashford, CEO, Ashford Industries," over and over again. But it wasn't just a business card she was handing him. It was a gateway to a completely different life. "Director of Aviation Maintenance," Alexandra said, her voice cutting through the noise of the jet engines behind them. "Starting salary of $180,000 per year, full benefits package, and a signing bonus of $50,000 that you can use however you need." Jake's knees nearly buckled. The numbers didn't seem real. He had never earned more than $40,000 in his best year, and that was before the layoffs started. The signing bonus alone was more money than he had ever seen at one time in his entire life. "But there's more," Alexandra continued, watching his face carefully. "I believe in investing in people who show exceptional talent. After 1 year of proven performance, I'll help you establish your own maintenance franchise. You'll have the option to open satellite operations at other airports, with full backing from Ashford Industries." The crowd around them had grown quiet, sensing that something important was happening. Even the ground crew members who had been cleaning nearby aircraft had stopped their work to listen. Everyone could feel the weight of this moment, the sense that they were witnessing someone's life change forever. Jake tried to speak but couldn't find his voice. His mind was racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. This morning, he had been worried about paying his rent. Now, he was being offered more money than his father had ever made in his best years as a mechanic. The opportunity was so big, so unexpected, that part of him wondered if it was real. "I know it's overwhelming," Alexandra said gently, "but I didn't build a billion-dollar company by hesitating when I recognized exceptional talent. What you accomplished here today wasn't just good mechanics work. It was leadership, innovation, and the kind of problem-solving that my industry desperately needs." Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was probably another bill collector or maybe his landlord asking about the rent. The contrast between his current reality and the future Alexandra was offering felt almost surreal. He thought about his sister, Mia, sitting in another doctor's waiting room, worried about how they would pay for her next round of treatments. "The medical insurance alone would cover everything your sister needs," Alexandra added, as if reading his thoughts. "I did some quick research while you were working. Ashford Industries has partnerships with the best medical facilities in the country. Your sister would have access to specialists and treatments that most insurance plans don't cover." That's when Jake realized this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about giving Mia a chance at a normal, healthy life without the constant worry about medical bills. This was about proving to himself and everyone who had ever doubted him that hard work and determination really could change everything. "Why me?" Jake asked, finally finding his voice. "You could hire anyone. You could recruit mechanics from the biggest companies in the industry. Why offer this to someone you met 3 hours ago?" Alexandra smiled, and for a moment, she looked less like an intimidating CEO and more like someone who remembered what it felt like to struggle for every opportunity. 15 years ago, I was trying to start my solar panel business out of my garage," she said. "I had big dreams but no money, no connections, and no one who believed in me. A wealthy investor took a chance on me when no one else would. He saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself." She paused, looking at the aircraft that Jake had just repaired with nothing but determination and creativity. "Today, I watched you do something that 2 experienced mechanics said was impossible. You didn't just fix my aircraft, you showed me the kind of innovative thinking that built my entire company. I'm not offering you a job because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering it because I think you could revolutionize how we approach aircraft maintenance." Jake looked around at the faces surrounding them. He saw respect in the eyes of the veteran, mechanics who had initially doubted him. He saw admiration from the ground crew members who had watched him work through the most challenging repair of his career. Most importantly, he saw belief in Alexandra's eyes, the same kind of belief he had always hoped someone would have in him. "There's one more thing," Alexandra said, pulling out her phone. "I'm going to call my head of human resources right now. If you accept this offer, you'll have a company credit card by tomorrow morning. The first thing I want you to do is go buy yourself a complete set of professional tools, the best money can buy. Consider it a welcome gift." Jake thought about his nearly empty toolbox back home, about all the equipment he had sold just to pay bills. The idea of walking into a tool store with unlimited budget seemed like a fantasy. "I need to ask you something important," Jake said, surprising himself with his directness. "This isn't charity, is it? You're not offering me this job because you feel bad about my situation?" Alexandra's expression became serious. "Jake, I've been running businesses for 15 years. I don't make hiring decisions based on emotions. I make them based on results. What you did today saved my company from a potential disaster. The merger I'm flying to Geneva for is worth $2 billion. If I missed that meeting because my aircraft couldn't fly, I'd lose everything I've built." She gestured toward the aircraft, its engines still running and ready for departure. "You didn't just fix a hydraulic system. You saved my entire empire. The question isn't whether you deserve this opportunity. It's whether you're brave enough to take it." Jake looked at the business card again, then at Alexandra, then at all the people who had gathered to witness this moment. He thought about his father, who had always told him that opportunities come to those who work hard and never give up. He thought about his sister, who had supported his dreams even when her own health was failing. He thought about all the nights he had lain awake wondering if things would ever get better. "Yes," he said simply. "I accept." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before Alexandra's face broke into the biggest smile Jake had seen from her all day. She reached out and shook his hand, and Jake could feel the calluses on her palms, proof that she had built her success through her own hard work. "Welcome to Ashford Industries, Director Jake," she said. "I have a feeling this is going to be the beginning of something extraordinary." As Alexandra prepared to board her aircraft for the flight to Geneva, she handed Jake another card with her personal assistant's contact information. "Rachel will call you first thing tomorrow morning to begin the paperwork," she said. "Your first day is Monday. I hope you're ready to change not just your life, but the entire aviation maintenance industry. Jake stood on the tarmac, watching as the aircraft he had repaired taxied toward the runway. In his pocket was a business card that represented everything he had ever dreamed of achieving. In his heart was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that his life was about to become something amazing. 6 months later, Jake would be managing maintenance operations for 12 aircraft across 5 states. His sister Mia would be healthy and debt-free, receiving treatment at one of the best medical facilities in the country. The franchise program Alexandra had promised would be launching with Jake as the pilot project, proving that innovative maintenance approaches could be scaled across the entire industry. But all of that was still in the future. For now, Jake stood in the afternoon sun, watching a billionaire's jet disappear into the sky, knowing that sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities really do come disguised as ordinary problems waiting for someone brave enough to solve them. The struggling mechanic who had started the day counting his last $43 was now the director of aviation maintenance for a billion-dollar company, and it all began with a simple willingness to help when others had given up.